It's a big season for the Blue Jackets. We've got Jeff Svoboda on the show today to talk about the newcomers, to talk about how surprised he was by their performance this season, and how to get even better. That's what's going up on today's Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. We've got a special guest today. We've got Jackets insider himself, Jeff Svoboda, and we're going to talk about, just all kinds of stuff. We talk about the season as a whole. We talk about how surprising the Blue Jackets season was, where they finished, how close they were to playoffs. We're going to talk about some of the new guys. We've got Dean Evason, brand new head coach for the Blue Jackets anyway. We've got Don Waddell we're going to talk about as well. All of that is coming up on today's Locked on Blue Jackets. And so I'm just going to get right into it. My conversation with Jeff Svoboda. So the Blue Jackets season obviously finished a little bit earlier than everyone was hoping for, but we're in off-season mode now, and every off-season, Locked on Blue Jackets has a special guest. And we come, Jeff Svoboda, Jackets insider, comes on. We talk a lot about the season that's just come, the season that we are about to have, and all of that good stuff. So, Jeff, thanks for hopping back on the show. I believe this is the fourth year in a row that we've had you on to discuss the Blue Jackets season, and let's get into it. The season, I think, was not what anyone expected for a lot of reasons, right? But if I asked you to kind of describe the season that the Blue Jackets had in 60 seconds or less, what would you say? I'm not going to hold you to that exact 60 seconds, but what's your elevator pitch for how the season went for the Blue Jackets?
Yeah, you're trying to really wrap me up here, aren't you? You know how long-winded I tend to get. Memorable, I guess, would be the word I would say. So many things happened this year, starting with, obviously the tragedy at the beginning of the season with Johnny Gaudreau, and then the team playing, for him and his brother Matthew in a lot of ways. And, having inspiring might be another word I would use as well, because there was a lot of inspiring things that happened, from just the play on the ice to the way the community came together throughout everything this year. And then ultimately disappointing just to fall a little bit short after being in the playoff race for such a long stretch of the second half of the season. So it's hard to wrap up, because there were so many different segments and so many different parts of it that happened throughout the year. And I don't think any of us is ever going to forget this season because of, those emotions that ran through the entire season, both with everything that happened off the ice, but then the way this team played and the way it came together and the way it played above its head, and the stretches where they played some really excellent hockey. So I think it was a really good foundational building block going forward. You needed on the ice to see some of these young players take steps forward, because that's the core. That's what they're building around. They're building around being a young team, trying to have success in the coming seasons. And we saw pretty much all of those young players take really big steps forward. And so the way they came together, the way that they performed, I know it's ultimately disappointing in the end, but I think it's going to really help set the course going forward for what this team can accomplish and what it believes it can accomplish as well. So it was a little bit more than 6 words, but that's kind of, as you look back, how I would sum up how things went this year.
Yeah, for sure. How surprised were you by this season? Because going into this season, I kind of, maybe a little bit flippantly, was like, they're either going to pick first overall in the lottery or they're going to win the cup, and there's going to be nothing in between. And obviously they kind of landed directly in between those two things. But if, someone had said, okay, it's October 10th or whatever, in 6 months' time or 7 months' time, the Blue Jackets are going to finish 2 points out of a playoff spot, would you laugh them out of the building, or was this kind of something that you thought we could see from this team?
Yeah, I think going into the year with, everything that happened before the season with the Gaudreau brothers, I mean, hockey was something I don't think any of us knew what to expect. Really, it was such uncharted waters and such a difficult situation for so many people. that when that puck dropped, I really had no idea what to expect out of this team. But I also do think, getting back on the ice for them was so important. They could be around each other. They could get back to normalcy. I remember, to like a personal thing, when my mother passed away during the playoffs in 2019, and just getting back to work and being around was so important for me because it was normalcy. It kind of, helped with the healing process and helped me, move, get back. I just keep saying get back to normal. But like that's what I needed in that situation. I think for the players, I think that's what they needed as well. Not to ever forget, Johnny and his brother, but honor them with their play and just, as they said, Johnny would have wanted them to get back out there and play. So I think there was a little bit of catharsis and just getting back to the daily routines of life and being around each other and things like that. And then from a pure hockey perspective, I remember writing in August, I kind of did, once free agency was over and was looking toward the season. And I said they had to make progress this year. 2 years ago, you're going through a rebuilding process. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be tough seasons. 2 years ago, they had all the injuries, and it was just a season that no one could have expected. And it was sort of understandable, how rough things went. And then, it was kind of similar in 2003, 2004, where, you just didn't – I understood a rebuild and getting those young guys experience, but at some point you have to translate those lessons into wins and losses. And so I said coming into the season, they had to make progress. I thought they'd be an improved team because I knew, you look at those guys, the Fantillis and the Johnsons and the Marchenkos and the Voronkovs, and it's like, these guys showed the skill they had in flashes, over the previous seasons, but at some point it had to start coming together to winning games and translating in a more consistent fashion. And that's what we saw. And I think that was one of the big reasons why this team was so much better is we saw, you need Adam Fantilli to be Adam Fantilli. You need him to be a cornerstone of this franchise. And the same with a lot of those guys we named. And they started to do it. And that's really exciting for the future because, they've drafted well, they brought in this talent, but at some point, those guys have to become the guys. There's still a great leadership core with the Werenskis and the Monahans and the Goodbransons and the Oliviers and the Corrales and all that. But this team wasn't going to be good until that young wave of talent got more consistent and got better. And that's what we saw this year. And that's what I think makes it so exciting going forward. So I thought they'd be better. I thought they'd be in the mix for the playoffs. I thought they'd probably not make the playoffs just because such huge improvements are hard to do in the NHL. But I thought it would be kind of the start of an upward trend, just looking at it from a pure hockey perspective. And that's what they delivered. So I guess it was kind of what I expected, maybe a little bit better, just because we did see pretty much all those young players take the steps they took. But yeah, I thought they were going to be better, and I thought they had to be better. At some point you've got to start translating those things, and that's what they did, and that's what they had to do. So good for them. But you know what? Now what the expectation is probably next year is you're going to have a fan base that's going to want to play in the playoffs. So we'll see kind of where it goes from here, but you have to keep that trajectory going forward.
Yeah, for sure. You got to keep taking steps. In a minute, we're going to get back to my conversation with Jeff about all of the new faces on the Blue Jackets this season and how successful they were. But first, I want to tell you about Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack it into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. They are one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. I love the no shells variety. I am a gremlin. I had a long train journey this weekend, and I absolutely housed an entire bag of the no shells jalapeno lime Wonderful Pistachios, and that honestly was the right decision. But if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite as well. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. I want to talk about the kids, obviously stepping up. I want to talk about Adam Fantilli specifically in a little bit here, but I want to talk about some of the newcomers to the team first. Obviously, brand new GM. It's been a minute since the Blue Jackets have had a new GM. Jarmo Kekalainen I believe he got the job in 2012, 2013. Yeah, 2013. So, yeah, it's been a minute. Don Waddell comes in. How do you think that this season has I hesitate to say how has this season gone for Waddell? Because I think a lot of this is just him building on what Jarmo Kekalainen put in place, right? Like a lot of this is all Jarmo draft picks, or a lot of Jarmo Kekalainen signings, things like that. But Don Waddell, I think, did a really good job tweaking the roster. And again, in kind of impossible circumstances, right? You don't replace a guy like Johnny Gaudreau overnight. But he brought in veteran pieces. I thought James Van Riemsdyk was a fantastic addition to this lineup. You've got guys like Zach Aston Reese. You've got, guys like Olivier stepping up. How do you think this has been? Do you think this would Don Waddell would consider this first season like a pretty good? Obviously, they talk about it's not a success because they didn't make the playoffs, right? I think Dean Evason said that in the end of season presser. But do you think that Don Waddell considers this season a success?
Yeah, I mean, say the players all kind of said, and the management, before this at the end of the year, kind of said it wasn't a success. We didn't make the playoffs, but they got 23 more points this year. They had 13 more wins. I mean, that's a success from that perspective, certainly at least. I think Don came in. He's a veteran guy. He's been around the NHL for a long time. I think that it was smart for him to come in and want to have a season where he kind of looked at the roster, looked at what they had, identified from within. Didn't just come in and take a blowtorch to things. Came in and as you said, made kind of those strategic changes, strategic additions to the team. He's talked a lot about how he wanted to bring in specific guys he knew, were good character people that could really fit into the mix that they have in that locker room. And obviously that was a success because of those guys you mentioned, the Van Riemsdykes and the Aston Reeses, Dante Fabro coming in the middle of the season. I think he struck a lot of the right notes. Even at the end of the year, the trade deadline, he had the decision of what to do. And I do think he was right. To have the credibility in the locker room that you have to have as the GM, you have to read the room and you have to, have the trust of the players. And the players were saying, like, we want to keep this group together. We want to try to make a playoff run. And you knew it was going to be tough because there was a lot of teams in that mix and there was only 1 or 2 spots available for what was probably 5 to 7 teams. So you knew the odds were probably not on your side. But they were in a spot where it just didn't make sense to sell off, the assets like the Ivan Provorovs of the world. And I think the credibility he built up in the locker room with that type of decision is going to go a long way going forward. And I know the ultimate goal of making the playoffs wasn't hit, but, I think that, if Provorov leaves and you don't have a draft pick, for him, like it's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, it was more important to do what he did, I think. And so I think he hit a lot of the right notes. And I think that he's kind of shown, you look at his track record, he's built teams pretty well. He did a great job down in Carolina. He's very connected with, 25 years in the league, understanding the league and being in the conversation for players and, knowing the other GMs and when guys get on the market, things like that. So I think it was, from a Don Waddell perspective, it was a wildly successful first season. And now with all the cap room they have, and now that he knows what he has in a lot of the players, it'll be pretty interesting to see where this goes from here. But you've got to have some confidence in what he's done because of what he did this first season, and then also the years before in his time in the NHL.
Yeah, I feel like he got not a bunch of criticism, but I know obviously there was a lot of RFAs for him to sign basically as soon as he walked in the door. He had a to-do list as tall as he was. Kent Johnson needed a contract, Marchenko, etc., etc.
Hiring a coach, for example.
Sorry?
Hiring a coach, he had to do that as well. So
yeah, exactly. Very, very long list. But I think a lot of people were like, well, why didn't he lock these guys up long term? Like, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? And then you look at the season Kent Johnson had, and he's making what, 1.8 million for the next 3 years?
Yeah.
That feels in hindsight, feels like a slam dunk, So I think a lot of people were critical of him for maybe being a little bit tentative to start the job, but I'm really excited to see what he does this summer. He's got approximately $1 billion in cap space to use, if my math is correct. So it's going to be an interesting one to see what Waddell does.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. And I know he's talked about long-term like free agency contracts that when you get people on the open market, you have to overpay. Whether it be term or money, that's just the deal when you hit UFAs. So I think that. If there's fans out there that think he's going to spend, I think it's what you said, $1 bajillion. I think it's about $40 million.
It's $41.5 million.
Yeah,
which is still not an insignificant amount of money, but it's not infinite.
if there's fans out there that think he's going to spend all of that money this offseason, I think they're going to be disappointed because A, it would be hard to spend that much money because you have to sign about 4 or 5 players to do it. And then B, you also look at, you're going to have a lot of these young guys up for contracts, in the coming seasons. And so you don't want to, you got to keep some of that money open. And then C, you don't want to be stuck with some of these onerous deals that you see around the league. It's the most dangerous day in hockey, as Don says. And I think if you look around, it is. You can overpay in a lot of situations and find yourself in some trouble. So, but he's going to strategically address, I think, what they need to do. I think say he's a smart guy. He's been around the league for a while. Not afraid to be active, not afraid to make trades, but it's going to be more targeted. I think they're going to sign a UFA or 2. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case because that's, you got the money, you've got the opportunity, you want to make this team better. But, it's not going to be so much a spending splurge, but it's going to be targeting what they need and trying to make it better from there.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we mentioned new coach in the middle there. Again, I was a little bit wary of Dean Evason coming in. Obviously, he did a great job in Minnesota, but I talked to, a couple of people that cover the team, and they said, yeah, good guy, great player coach. Like, you know what you get with Dean Evason, but he does rely on his veterans a little bit much, and that made me a little bit wary, just because the team is so young. And then I look at this season, and you look at the jumps that Adam Fantilli made, you look at the Kent Johnson, and I'm like, honestly, Everton gets an A+ from me this season. Again, walking into an impossible situation of you're brand new to the team and they've had this horrible tragedy occur, and now you have to be the one to motivate them to play hockey. And I think he did a fantastic job. And again, I know that he says that it wasn't a success because they should have made the playoffs, but how different did this season feel with a guy like Evason in the room versus a guy like, and this is, I don't want to like criticize Pascal Vincent because I think he probably did about as good of a job as he could have done considering the circumstances of, getting hired, 4 days before training camp. How different did this season feel with a guy like Evason, a veteran coach, someone who's been in the league for, a while? What was that like to kind of deal with as a reporter or as media for the team?
Yeah, I think it felt completely different. It just felt more organized. It felt like you could tell the difference between a first-time head coach, which is what the Blue Jackets had the previous 2 times, and a coach like Dean Evason, who, even though he only had one previous head coaching stint, has been, around for a long time and does have that, being in the big chair experience under his belt. I think that is important. Someone who was around, for Brad Larson and for Pascal Vincent becoming the head coach, even if you've been an assistant and even if you've done it at the AHL level, the first time at the NHL level, when you get put in that big chair, it's a different animal. It just is. That experience goes a long way. And I think with Dean Evason, you saw someone who had not only had a previous head coaching stint, but also probably learned from that head coaching stint as well, where he was probably a better coach this time around than he was the last time around in Minnesota. I would agree. He struck a lot of the right notes. First, from a coaching perspective, it was black and white. The coaches, it was said, like, this is what we expect of you. They don't want gray areas. They don't want, if you go into this type of player, this situation, you can do X, Y, or Z, whatever, it's do X. And if X doesn't work, that's fine. That's what we told you to do. That's what the Blue Jackets do. So everyone was on the same page from that standpoint. And I think, they still weren't one of the better defensive teams in the NHL, but I think there was clearly more structure in their game on the ice as the season went by. So, that was one of the reasons why they were a better team this year. And, the expectations were clear. And I think you talk to any player in the NHL, they don't care how you do it. They just want clear expectations, and that was something the players talked about all season was, there was no ambiguity. There was no questioning what they should be doing. It was laid out by the coaching staff. And that's all they asked for, as players is to, you can't play fast if you're thinking, lay it out, tell us what to do, and we'll do it. And so I think that was a big part from an X's and O's standpoint that helped them be a better team. And then, as you mentioned, him coming in, no one expected the situation with the Gaudreaus, and it seemed as though Dean hit pretty much every note right there as far as helping get the guys through that. Telling them, like, whatever you need, we're there for you. If you don't want to talk about it, we won't talk about it. If you do want to talk about it, we will talk about it. But do what you have to do for you, because everybody's different in those types of situations. So, I think that, it was obviously a really strong year for him. If you bring in a new coach and you're 13 wins and 23 points better, that's pretty good. I'm pretty surprised he wasn't a finalist for the Jack Adams Award. And you know what? Those coaches all had good years too. And I know some people are like, oh, why Scott O'Neill? And they were good last year. They were good this year. But I think at some point with those awards, you should reward the teams that are good. Those coaches still did a good job.
The team is good because they have a good coach.
Yeah, like I'm not going to take anything away from the other finalists, but for the situation Dean was put in so many different ways, I think he did a great job with this team, and I think it's could be even better next year when they come in. There's no getting to know process. This is what's expected of you from day one. That could help them keep this momentum going, keep on that upward trajectory. So I think he was the right guy at the right time for sure for this group. With everything that happened, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I've talked about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, actually, but the Blue Jackets actually were the most improved team in terms of points. So they, I think, had 25, 23, potentially 25 more points last year. And they also improved their goal differential from, I think it was minus 63 to +5. Which was, I believe, second in the entire NHL. The only team that had a better improved goal differential was the Washington Capitals, who improved by like +90 or something insane. You've got to think that if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs next season, you've got to think that Dean Evason is getting that Jack Adams nod, right?
Yeah, it is weird how in the voting, like they don't want to reward coaches who don't make the playoffs. Like it seems like that's a thing, which I think is kind of dumb. It doesn't take anything. If the Blue Jackets win one more game, is he that much better a coach? Like, no, like he still clearly did a good job. Yeah. But it is what it is. Like I say, if we're going to quibble with NHL awards, we're just wasting our time. Like,
we'll be here all day.
Yeah, like it's great to get honored, but like there's far more pressing things in the world. Like Dean Evason did a great job with his team, whether he's a Jack Adams finalist or not. So,
for sure.
Yeah, so I'm not going to sit here like whatever. Those guys did, I'm not going to argue with any of the finalists. Like those were really good teams who clearly had good coaches, and so good for them. That they get that honor. Dean deserved to be in that conversation. And when the voting comes out, if he finishes 4th or 5th, that's fine. He had a good year no matter what. And it's also, if you look at it, you go back and look at the list of coaches that win that award. Most of them get fired anyway. Yeah. So it doesn't, whatever. It doesn't matter.
What he's doing is just avoiding the curse, I think, is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah. And also, if he finishes 4th in Jack Adams voting, oh no, he was the 4th best coach in a 32-team league. So
yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, I would take the 4th place out of 32. I want to talk about one more guy that came in this summer, new, again, kind of in impossible circumstances, Sean Monahan, who, again, we talked about the most dangerous day in hockey, free agency. And again, I was like, man, did they, pay maybe a little bit too much for a little bit too long? It's the UFA tax. It happens. I don't think anyone expected the Sean Monahan that the Blue Jackets got this year. Is that fair to say? Except maybe Monahan himself.
Yeah, no, I mean, if they'd signed him to a $10 million contract, he would have been worth every penny this year. So, so that looks like it's good. Glad that you mentioned that, because when I was talking about it being the most dangerous day in hockey, I was thinking back to last year and didn't say it, but well, they did get Sean Monahan last year in UFA, and it turned out to be a pretty good deal. So not just, if you look at his play on the ice, I mean, no. I think he played 53 games this season and had the most points ever for a Blue Jackets player in his first 53 games with the franchise. So, that's pretty good. And that list includes not just like rookies, but, the guys they're brought in, like the Johnny Gaudreaus and the trying to think of Artemi Panarin. He had more points than those guys in his first 53 games. So that, that's pretty darn good. But just what he means to this team. I mean, every player on this team talks about just what he means to that team in the locker room and what a mentor he's been to the young players. And, he's brought so much to the table for that room off the ice that, even if he'd had 30 points this year, it would have been a valuable signing for the Blue Jackets. But then when you just factor in the production and what he did to the lineup and how he helped those young guys come along and how he meshed so well with Kirill Marchenko on the top line. I mean, and then we haven't even figured in, the as you said, impossible circumstances in which he comes in and how much that weighed on him throughout the season. And he's kind of a private, quiet guy. So I, haven't delved into it a ton with him, but I mean, I think we all know, just how difficult this year was for him with everything that happened. I can't imagine being in his shoes and, having to everything that happened and then going out there and playing hockey, even though, again, it was probably a catharsis for him to get back out there, that it's still a looming thing for him through the whole thing. So, worth every penny. If that's the type of free agent signing we can come to expect from Don Waddell, then I think we're in pretty good hands because, yeah, as you said, you couldn't have asked for any more from him. And I think what he means to this franchise, what he means to that group is going to continue going forward and be important for what they're trying to build here. Because, and I've talked about it till I'm blue in the face the last couple of years, and even at the start of this show about how important the young players are to this organization. But for those guys to get better and become the players that they can be, you need Sean Monahans around to help them on that path. And whether it be vocally or just by example, seeing the way that he goes about everything on a daily basis was tremendously valuable to this team. And I think it's going to keep paying dividends for that as well down the road. So A++ really for Sean Monahan this year.
Yeah.
And, I'm excited to kind of see, have him here for a couple years now because he's become one of the faces of the franchise in just one season.
Yeah. In a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Jeff Svoboda talking about, what exactly Sean Monahan brought to the table for the Blue Jackets this season. That's coming up in just a second. Before that, though, I do want to remind you that Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available every single day. Thank you for making us your first listen, and we will be bringing you hot, fresh, new content every weekday until the boss tells me to stop. So you've got all of that to look forward to in the off season, and let's get back to the show where we talk a lot about just how much we love Sean Monahan. And that's all I've got today. Tomorrow, I'm going to be finishing my conversation with Jeff because he was so great that we talked for way too long to turn into a single episode. So tomorrow, we're going to talk about the kids stepping up. We're going to talk about Adam Fantilli. We're going to talk about Cole Sullinger. We're going to talk about Kirill Marchenko, the impact that all those guys had. And we're also going to talk about what the next steps are for the Blue Jackets. What do they need to do this summer to become that playoff team that they almost were this season? That's all coming up. Thanks for listening to this episode, though. Making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. You can find Jeff over at Jackets Insider on both Twitter and Instagram. So go check him out there. And like I said, we will be back tomorrow with more Jeff Svoboda content, talking about kids, talking about the summer, and just generally having fun talking about the Blue Jackets. So until then, make sure you stay locked on.